going on, everybody? Welcome to another NFL deep dive. You will notice this video is shorter than many of my other deep dives. This is because I dig more and more into each team, and as I do, injuries happen and camps are underway. These rankings that I made before all of this are starting to become less and less reflective of where I actually stand on these teams now. So I really want to get through these videos and focus on other things now as we get closer and closer to the start of the season, and in general keep these videos a little shorter for you. So at the 11th spot, the Giants now are one of those teams that I am totally shifting on. About 2 weeks ago, I would have been fine with this, but as I sat down to research for this video, the more and more I started questioning how this team is going to make the playoffs this season. Obviously, it's a team with a lot of hype going into this year, knowing a lot of people loved this team at the end of last year. Lots of people were picking them to win the NFC, and I've heard some people picking them to win the Super Bowl this year. So knowing that, I like to get ahead in these trends, and I head over to Bovada and was disappointed to find that Vegas doesn't think they make it either. As a bet for them to miss the playoffs will only pay -140, which isn't really worth it. So I want to clarify that above everything else I'm about to say, kind of scrutinizing this team, the primary reason I am getting so low on this team is still the offense. I absolutely do not understand how there is still this perception that this was even an average offense last season, let alone a really good one. I'm quoting Kevin Clark of The Ringer on their most recent podcast. This was the 25th ranked offense last season. They averaged 1 more yard per game than the damn New York Jets. To make matters even worse, they went 2-6 in games where the opponents scored 20 or more points. So they had Brandon Marshall and draft a flashy, undersized tight end who can't really block in Evan Ingram, and everyone starts to freak out. All they're doing here is hiding the fact that Eli Manning has been one of the worst and least efficient quarterbacks in the league over the last 2 seasons. If they would have gone out and drafted Forrest Lamp and maybe Kareem Hunt and really beefed up this running game, I'd be way more excited. This offense has been miserable at running the ball, a liability that looks to be maybe even worse next season. And the play calling by Ben McAdoo has also been heavily scrutinized and likely won't improve much either. Marshall and Ingram, they add some nice big targets for opponents to focus on, and in the right matchup, maybe against worse secondaries, it should lead to a slight bump in the offense. But it sure as hell isn't going to bring this offense out of the garbage to a level where I'm comfortable picking them to win this division or even make the playoffs. So that said, consider all further scrutiny of this team is as a reaction to the hype of a team that many are actually picking to go to the Super Bowl this season. Many of the points that I will bring up here, I probably would not feel necessary to say if the expectations for this team were more like 8-8, which I think are much more realistic. So anyway, for those that have been following my deep dive videos, thank you for one. But you know about my 3 biggies when it comes to projecting how good a team is going to be. These are the 3 questions I always ask about a football team heading into the season. If I don't get a resounding yes on any one of these questions, I am not going to have much confidence predicting that team to make the playoffs or go far in the playoffs. The first question is, of course, does this team have an elite quarterback? Number 2 is, can this team get after the other team's quarterback? And number 3 is, can this team dominate the line of scrimmage on offense? These are the core assets of your typical modern day playoff team. And without at least one of these assets, not only is it hard to win consistently throughout a 16-game stretch, but more specifically, it is incredibly hard to beat elite quarterbacks if you don't have one of your own, the ability to get the opponent's elite quarterback off their game by getting to them quickly, or the ability to run the ball and keep the ball out of the other team's hands. So these 3 biggies are also true matchup-proof assets to a football team. Great receivers or a great secondary like the Giants have can be dominant in the right matchups against the right teams, but without controlling the line of scrimmage or a quarterback that can create offense by himself, a lot of your game plan can get wrecked before it even gets started if plays break down up front, as that is where it all starts. So let's do this for the Giants. Quarterback? No. Either by the eye test in which Eli has been one of the worst starters in the NFL over the last 2 seasons, or statistically, where he was 27th in quarterback rating. Can they rush the quarterback? Well, sort of. Of these 3, that's the one they're closest to. So they tied for 14th in sacks last season, which is fine. I thought by the eye test, we saw a lot of 4-man pressures and coverage sacks, with plenty of times where quarterbacks had extended periods of time to feel frankly safe in the pocket against this Giants team. I feel pretty safe myself saying Vernon and Pierre-Paul are slightly overrated as an edge rushing duo, that neither are true number 1 edge rushers, yet I think there are people out there who would consider not just one of them but both to be elite edge rushers, which I disagree with. They're fine players, but neither are a guy that I would want to be my featured edge rusher. And think back to the start of the playoffs last season when many were picking the Giants to win the Super Bowl, to go to the Super Bowl. But for me, this lack of edge rush was the exact reason I picked the Packers to win that game. You can double check me on that and go back to my predictor video. And sure enough, they go into Lambeau and Rodgers had all day to throw. The D-backs were able to hold for about 20 minutes or so, but we absolutely saw a concerning lack of pass rush in that game. It's a game that I think really provides support for why I say it doesn't matter who is playing at the second level of your defense if they are asked to cover for more than 5 seconds on just about every play like we saw in that game. Not only does your coverage unit grow tired, but most good coaches and quarterbacks will find a way to exploit your defense throughout the course of a 60-minute game like the Packers did, eventually scoring 38 points in that game against an elite defense. So while there are worse pass rushers out there, I certainly don't love the Giants edge rushers. And the answer to can they get after the quarterback for me is not a resounding yes. And the answer to question number 3, can they control the line of scrimmage on offense, is a resounding no. More like a my God, no. This is one of the worst offensive lines in all of football, and this team did nothing this offseason to improve upon it outside of signing the likes of DJ Fluker, a struggled DJ Fluker, and drafting Adam Bisnowaty out of Pitt late in the draft, who I actually like quite a bit, but he's not going to give this team an enforcer up front like they desperately need. So they don't have any of my 3 biggies, which is very concerning off the bat. Now, obviously, you can say, franchise guy, the Giants made it last year, so your theory sucks. Well, my 3 questions are just a starting point. I also have yet to hear a sound argument for why taking a look at injuries and the number of close games from the previous season isn't a good predicting tool. So as far as health goes, the Giants were relatively healthy last year. They were in the top half for general health, as shown on this graph here, and really suffered very few significant injuries, as they had season-ending injuries to Shane Vereen and Darian Thompson, and were without Jason Pierre-Paul and perhaps some of those corners in spots, though Giants fans can correct me if I'm wrong on those. By NFL standards, most teams would consider this to be good fortune or luck. There are very good teams in the NFC alone, like Minnesota, Carolina, New Orleans, Arizona, who all get better on the returning healthy starters front, which I keep advocating in these videos as the number 1 way to improve from year A to year B, not the draft, not free agency, getting healthy. Then you look at close games where this team played in a ton of. Now, it is the nature of a team with a defense like this to play in a lot of close games, so I'm willing to give the Giants somewhat of a pass, but it is quite concerning to me that this team was 2-6 last season when their opponents scored over 20 points. That is cause for glaring concern. I think it is reflective of how bad this team's offense was and how the lack of a running game really hurts this team, who wants to, or at least should want to, be a defense-first team. And for the record, this team only won 2 games all season by more than 1 score, one of which was against the Cleveland Browns. So while I do think it is hard to win without a quarterback, a good pass rush, and an offensive line, it isn't impossible. Obviously, the Giants did it last year. Now, this is still a very good football team despite all of this criticism. I keep echoing how good the NFL looks this year, at least on paper. You got about 25 deep of honest playoff contenders. This secondary is phenomenal. I really don't have many doubts that this is the best secondary in the league. The fact that they play so well despite the lack of an explosive pass rush makes it all the more exciting. You've got these corners. I would say it's the second best group of corners right behind Denver. I love Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie. I think he's a little better than Jenkins. I want to know what Giants fans, which corner you think is better. You've probably watched these guys a little closer than I have. And then Eli Apple should continue to grow, who had a great year last year as well. The depth after them is just okay. I was a little surprised they didn't use a later pick on a developmental corner in what was a really deep class. You could have had some value there in the 5th or 6th round. The safeties here are great. Landon Collins right there with Eric Berry as the best safety in football, though I think he does need to get better at calculating his risks. Brett Coleman, another YouTuber, did an awesome film review of Landon Collins. I suggest checking that out. It's a great video. Darian Thompson should be the other starter here. Andrew Adams, by the way, serious faller in terms of my Madden roster. Coming down from, I think, over an 80 overall in the vanilla roster. Yeah, he had a great season, but he isn't even the starter as of now with Darian Thompson back healthy. Adams may have had a good year last year, but a second-year undrafted safety competing with Nat Brehe for a backup role is far from an 80 overall, which should be reserved for players on the fringe of becoming a star. So the problem with this defense comes in the front seven. I say quote-unquote problem. It's obviously it's a top 10 defense. Outside of Snack Harrison, there are really no game wreckers to complement this excellent secondary. They lose Jonathan Hankins, and overall you end up with mostly the same unit you had last year, which includes an unexciting group of linebackers and an average pass rush from a collection of veteran players who have really already hit their prime. Now, you do have some young guys to keep an eye on. Dalvin Tomlinson, a second rounder out of Alabama, should and frankly might need to get plenty of playing time here, as they are very thin after Snacks. And Romeo Okwara as the first guy off the bench on the edge. Each of those two guys have some developmental upside and are guys to keep an eye on. And then BJ Goodson, a fourth rounder from last season, looks like he might actually get a chance to start this year, so can he end up becoming the inside linebacker this team kind of needs? But until we see more from these young guys, this front seven is still just average in my opinion. Against good opposing offenses, most will be able to get theirs for 20 points or so against this defense, unless the G-men can actually find a way to dial up the heat more or get these linebackers to start forcing some more turnovers, which was a problem last year too. So as I mentioned, this team doesn't win when the other guys score over 20 points because this offense is honestly really bad. With no running game, authority at the line of scrimmage, or pass protection, I am heavily confident in saying that this offense will yet again finish in the bottom third of NFL offenses. To call this run game last season abysmal could be considered a compliment, and the biggest move they made to improve it was signing an H-back in Rhett Ellison. These running backs are not good. The only guy I'm even remotely interested in from a fantasy perspective is Shane Vereen in a deeper PPR format. I do not like Wayne Gallman. He reminds me a ton of James Starks as an awkward runner who runs upright and off balance. A guy that at 6 feet tall would be much better, tuning his body to be more of a power back. And while this receiving core is great and should be able to generate some offense in the right matchups, it will not be consistent all season as this offensive line is below average at best. Like, who is starting at tackle here? Eric Flowers on the left and DJ Fluker on the right? Okay, how did that work out for San Diego last few seasons? This receiving core, though, is pretty damn good. Obviously, Odell and Marshall. We will find out what we get from Ingram and Shepard, though Shepard is injured right now. I'm completely staying away from Brandon Marshall in a fantasy perspective. Sure, he has the ability to catch 10 touchdowns or so. I don't think it happens, though, with Odell there. But there is this perception that this is an upgraded situation for Marshall, which I don't understand. Eli is marginally better than 2015 Fitzpatrick, and this offense in general is substantially worse than Marshall had in 2015 when he finished as a top 5 fantasy receiver. And that was also when he wasn't competing with Odell Beckham for targets, by the way. But moving on, at quarterback, don't even get me started on Eli Manning, please. I don't think I can name 5 starters right now and say with any confidence that Eli Manning is better than those 5. So this is not an offense that will be good enough to support a defense that can still be somewhat matchup dependent without that dominant front 7. And as we saw, and as I keep stressing, the Giants lost 6 games last season when opponents scored more than 20 points, and they gave up more than 20 points in 8 games last year. So as you can imagine, I'm taking the under 9 wins for this Giants team. I think just getting to 500 is going to be a struggle. With Eli at the helm, I think they end up on the wrong side of a lot of 23 to 17 point games. I'm not picking this team to win the division, and I'm starting to actually lean towards this being the worst team in this division with Washington ahead of them, though I'm not quite there yet. At 22-1 to win the Super Bowl, I'd much rather take a chance on other NFC teams like Minnesota or Arizona, who at 33-1 are in worse divisions and have higher upsides, in my opinion, in terms of their defense and their offenses. So Giants fans, I'd expect you to be pretty upset. Tell me why I'm wrong, and I'll at least hear you out. Again, this 11th spot in the power rankings would probably be more in the low teens if I were ranking this team now. So the rest of you guys, let me know your thoughts. Do you buy my argument that the Giants are not a playoff team in 2017? And that's all I got. So cheers everyone, and we'll see you next time.